I think it was 5 when I was given my first packet of seeds by one of my aunts, who ordered my mother to give me some space in the garden to sow the seeds. And at the age of 7, I started growing cacti, and that's been my whole life. So this is quite a recently introduced epiphytic cactus, and it flowers at night with very sweetly scented flowers. And these flowers can actually be made into soup. This orchid is called Myrmecophila, which means the ant lover. If you go near the plant and you touch it, the ants attack you. So this is one of my favourite plants. It's called the elephant yam. But people don't realise, instead of eating it, cooking it and eating it, you plant it in a big pot. You can get this wonderful leaf to develop, which ends up looking like a miniature palm tree. And then after a few of these big leaves have developed, you may be lucky enough to get a flower, which is a huge, shapeless, very smelly thing that's pollinated by flies, and for a few hours absolutely stinks. I tell you what, if you're going to be the director of the Singapore Botanic Gardens, or for that matter any botanic garden, I think it's an essential qualification that you're crazy about plants. My apartment's just off Tanglin Road, and I can walk between 13 and 18 minutes to the Botanic Gardens. I was born in a city, and I've lived in a city most of my life, but I've never lived really in the city environment. I've always managed to live in places which were much greener and quieter and more peaceful. Without plants and fungi, the ecosystem would not function. None of us, none of the other animals on the planet could survive without the food chain and the atmospheric chain of reactions that plants are involved in. Well over half the world's population now lives in cities. So Singapore isn't in that respect any different from anywhere else. But the real issue is that people who live in cities lose contact with the natural world. And losing it is a very dangerous thing, because once we lose the sense of our connection with nature, we will start to exploit the commodities of nature in an unsustainable way, and that's what has to change. You ask someone in the street, well, here's this tree, what's it doing? And they'll say, well, it's rooted in the ground, it's growing up towards the sky, it's giving me shade. All of that is true, but what the man in the street doesn't get is that the material that tree is formed from, the wood, the leaves, the roots even, it's come from the atmosphere. Because trees and plants in general are built from atmospheric carbon, from carbon dioxide, the gas everybody's worried about because there's more and more of it in the atmosphere and it's changing our climate. All of these things are connected. The weather is ultimately connected with the ecology of the planet. And so it all comes back to preserving the forests. And actually, it's more than just preserving what's left. We need to put back some of what's been lost. The site that was chosen for the Singapore Botanic Gardens turns out to be a very special one because of the topography, the layout of the landscape. That is the thing which actually gives you this green oasis feel when you're inside. Not just the greenery, but the fact that it's a series of valleys and gentle rolling hills surrounded by very tall and dense trees effectively isolates you from the city. And once you're inside, you can forget there ever is a city outside. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you actually can't hear it. And yet you're 10 minutes walk from Orchard Road. All of that is completely off the radar once you're in the Botanic Gardens. And I think that is really part of its magic. When the land was gifted by the colonial government in 1859, it actually consisted of three things. 6 hectares of virgin jungle, which had somehow been spared the axe. Quite a large area of secondary vegetation, which had grown up after the land had been used for the cultivation of gambia and pepper by the early Chinese settlers. And a series of patches of freshwater swamp. But what it was from the very beginning, and still is today, is a refuge for people to visit. People come to the Botanic Gardens with their families, and so the youngsters grow up, and some of their earliest memories may be a photograph with mum or dad or the grandparents beside one of the great trees in the Botanic Gardens, or feeding the swans in the lake. And so it's a place that's hardwired into the Singaporean psyche. And then, of course, there's the fact that it was the obvious space chosen by the Ministry of Culture and Mr. Lee Kuan Yew in the late 1950s for cultural events that would bring the different races and ethnic groups in the nation together in unity and start creating a national culture. And in fact, the great man uttered famously the words on such an occasion in front of an audience of 22,000. Here, I hope, under open skies, Malays, Chinese and Indians will work together to create a national culture. But I think it's fair to say that probably 90% or more who use the Botanic Gardens regularly are ignorant of its history. Gardens are more than just places to relax and enjoy nature, to meet with your family and your loved ones, to have your wedding photographs taken. They're actually places which started new agroeconomies and changed the world. And importantly, it has changed the fortune of Singapore through the introduction of these economic products. These 3 old trees behind me are nutmeg trees, and they have an interesting connection with the most famous shopping street in Singapore, Orchard Road, because in the first half of the 19th century, both sides of Orchard Road were full of nutmeg orchards, thousands of trees. It was a very lucrative business. And this is what they produce, a fruit which has a yellow outside and is a bit fleshy, and then inside there's this strange brain-like reddish structure covering the seed, which is the actual nutmeg, and the reddish thing is mace. So this is the one spice tree which produces 2 different kinds of spice, mace and nutmeg itself. When people visit the Botanic Gardens, they mostly notice the greenery and the landscape, but dotted throughout that landscape is a series of historic buildings. The oldest is actually the little cast iron gazebo, which is by Swan Lake, which dates from around the 1850s. It used to be in the old Admiralty building in Grange Road. And that was brought to the Botanic Gardens in more recent times. Botanic Gardens has more than 40 officially recognised heritage trees. And they range from giants in the rainforest, which were certainly not planted by the hand of man. They were there and they're part of nature. And we don't know how many hundreds of years old they are, but they are certainly many hundreds of years old. This is the famous $5 tree. We believe it grew up in secondary vegetation. That's why it's got this very long, low arm of a branch. It features, of course, on the reverse of the Singapore $5 note. And it's become the symbol of the Garden City movement, what we now call City in a Garden. I'm often asked, what's your favourite spot in the Botanic Gardens? And you know, this is an impossible question to answer because there are so many beautiful places. But if I'm really pushed with that question, I'll choose the highest point on the site. We're here in the National Orchid Garden, right next to Birkhill Hall, in a shelter. And from this shelter, you can see the whole rainforest ranged around. Some of the trees are in flower at the moment. Lots of different textures, different shades of green. We are here in Singapore, but you can't hear the sound of traffic, of aeroplanes, only the sound of people enjoying themselves in the garden, the sound of birds, cicadas and so on. There's nothing to be seen of the city. This is a green Shangri-La. Did you know there was an economic crop developed in the Botanic Gardens which not only changed the future of Singapore, but actually changed the world? So it was rubber that was introduced to the Botanic Gardens and then used to found a new plantation industry which made Singapore and Malaya rich. The rubber story actually begins in 1877 when 12 trees were introduced to the Singapore Botanic Gardens as a potential crop. Later, Ridley arrives as director in 1888. He's famous for introducing rubber, and of course he was nicknamed Rubber Ridley and Mad Ridley because he was an extraordinary person in many ways.
When you look at Ridley, it's not only the story of the Botanic Gardens, it's a study of Singapore, it's a study of the region, it's a study of economics, geography, botany, colonial society. He came here in 1888 to be the director of the gardens, and at the time he took over a relatively young garden and he gave it a role in society, and that role was to help support the colonial state, the imperial economy, and he's mainly known for doing that through rubber. Before Ridley arrived in Singapore, there had already been developed an economic garden in what today is the northern half of the Singapore Botanic Gardens. And in this economic garden, they were searching for plants that could bring profit to the empire. So rubber was one of these plants. It had been planted by Merton, who was the first superintendent, basically the director of the gardens in the late 1870s. But it was Ridley who determined what species of tree within the rubber family would be used. He also helped develop the form of tapping the rubber, which is the famous herringbone method. He then promoted it outside of Singapore for the most part. He was able to convince a plantation owner near Malacca to plant 16 hectares of his plantation with rubber. When this was eventually taken up by planters in the region, it truly boomed and became the dominant aspect of the economy in the early 20th century. Malaya itself produced 41% of the rubber in 1915 globally. And by the 1930s, Southeast Asia, so Indonesia or the Dutch East Indies, Malaya, Vietnam, and Thailand, produced 90% of the world's rubber. And the economy of Southeast Asia was dominated by this one plant that was developed here at the Botanic Gardens. His greatest critic was Frank Swettenham, a very well-known colonial figure. He was a governor of the Straits Settlements. He was well respected in London in the colonial office, and he clashed with Ridley. In the mid-1890s, for example, there was an attempt to close down the economic garden. In a sense, the exact place where they had developed rubber. And Swettenham wanted to shut it down because it had already existed for some 10 years, 15 years, and had not produced yet a plant that made money for the empire. Ridley found this to be an absurd notion. The idea that you could look at the natural world and snap your finger and immediately make money. It took time. You needed to learn the techniques. And so this was, in a sense, his number one obstacle was, in a sense, colonial bureaucrats, he would say, who simply didn't understand the natural world. Another obstacle he faced was that when he went out to talk to plantation owners, they were already making a profit. Why should they shift over to this new product that was unproven?
My grandfather, Tan Chien, must have trusted his suggestion of growing rubber. It was a small area tryout, and it was also used for making tires for bicycles. Then later on, we didn't expect it to be a bonanza because the car industry came in turn of the century with Ford and General Motors. That started the ball rolling, and I think it was an important economic industry in the agriculture world to start for Malaya.
We're here in Holtham Hall in the Gardens Heritage Museum, and right here is an old rubber tree trunk which has been scored in the style of the herringbone pattern. Prior to that, rubber had been harvested in the Amazon by severely damaging the trees, and this often resulted in the death of the tree. So Ridley's method showed how you could harvest the latex by repeatedly and very shallowly cutting the trunk in this pattern, and then the latex would run down the central channel and be collected in a cup. The rubber boom propelled Singapore forward as the fatherland of the rubber industry. The crop was being exported from the port, the great port of Singapore, and it made actually Singapore a centre of trade. After that, there were many other developments, but rubber was the beginning of many things in Singapore. So rubber had made Singapore and Malaysia a rich place, and this continued well into the 20th century. But of course, if you make a place very rich, it can become attractive to other people, and that's where we have a very dark picture coming on the horizon. So the very black period in Singapore's history was, of course, the Second World War, when Malaysia and Singapore was overrun by the Japanese troops. And the Japanese undoubtedly would have been attracted to the region through its wealth, part of which at least had come from things like rubber. But the Botanic Gardens' wartime history is a very different story to the rest of Singapore. During the Second World War, of course, Singapore was overrun by the Japanese, and we know very little about what happened to the Botanic Gardens during that period of years. But one thing we do know is the origin of these brick steps. The bricks were made and the steps were built by some Australian prisoners of war, who 50 years later came back to see their handiwork in August 1995 and told one of our staff that these were the bricks that they made. And the question, of course, is why are nearly all the bricks marked with these rather crude arrows? And we think the arrows were made on the bricks by the prisoners of war as a protest about their captivity. And perhaps most significantly, during the Second World War, the Japanese imposed a director from Japan, a botanist, to be in charge of the Botanic Gardens, and he and his staff carried on scientific research during the period of the war, and so even during the war itself, the functionality of the Botanic Gardens continued. The Singapore Botanic Gardens merits inclusion on the World Heritage List in a category that you might say is its own, which is it's the best preserved tropical colonial botanic gardens in the British system. Heritage can be something that existed in the past and has not changed, but there's also the concept of living heritage, where the thing from the past is still working today, and that's indeed the case of the Botanic Gardens in Singapore. not only is its landscape, its layout, and its general appearance very similar to what it was from the early times, even now we have the rainforest remnant, which was preserved from the very beginnings of the Botanic Garden. I mean, that 6-hectare patch of rainforest is millions of years old, and it's been preserved and will be preserved into the future. You know, visitors to the Botanic Gardens sometimes wonder why there's all these dead leaves on the ground. These leaves are here for a purpose. We intentionally leave them. In fact, we rake them around the base of the trees because this is what the trees need to survive. If you go into our rainforest, you'll see that the floor of the forest is covered in a dense layer of leaves. And actually, these leaves are not nature's trash. They are the fertilizer that the trees need to survive. And you can see how important the leaves are for the germination of seedlings. So please, this is not nature's trash. This is something that's really valuable and something we have to look after. You know, we've done so much damage to nature. We've so interfered with it. There are very few primary tracts of forest of sufficient size left in nature to be self-sustaining. There's just a few places in the world where it's like this. And so the role of the Botanic Gardens today is to understand how to put back that nature in a way that it can be self-sustaining. So in other words, have all the ecological elements working together in balance so that the forest can sustain itself. That's got to be the objective of all Botanic Gardens, and it's certainly the objective of the Singapore Botanic Gardens.